Good afternoon. Today about my father, Dr. George Sheehan, and his ideas about play and their central place in our lives. In 1963, my dad was a respected cardiologist here in Red Bank. His office just a couple of blocks from here. We lived in Rumson, living in Rumson with his wife, Mary Jane, and the 12 of us. 12 kids. My brother George and I were students at CBA, a school that he founded. We were running on the track team. He had been a track athlete in college, but like most people in his generation, hung up his spikes on graduation. But something about that rekindled his competitive spirit, and at the age of 45, he started to run again. He started in the backyard, beating out a loop in the backyard, but he soon escaped those confines and headed out onto the roads. The novelty of a middle-aged man running on Rumson Road 50 years ago, believe me, it's true. It may have caused us a little bit of embarrassment, but it didn't faze him. He intentionally saw himself as breaking from the herd. And within a year, he was lining up with 225 fellow travelers to run his first Boston Marathon. When quizzical colleagues and friends asked him, "George, why are you doing this?" He had an answer, and in a word, his answer was play. What he found on his daily runs was a reconnection to his childhood and his childhood sense of play. Like Thoreau, on his walks, my father traveled widely on his daily runs along the river road. The Navesink became his Walden Pond, and play became his gateway to self-discovery. In his runs, he tapped into dormant aspects of himself. He refreshed his senses. He found that running was a playful experience for him, and he wanted a way to talk about it. He managed to get himself a byline in the Red Bank Register, and through his writings, he found his voice. And his voice resonated with the millions that were beginning to lace up their running shoes and start running. His voice became the voice of the running movement, and he rode that movement through several books and onto the best-selling charts. For him, running was play, but he knew it wasn't for everyone, so he urged us all to find our play. Find what you're best at and what you feel good at. Find something through which you feel self-acceptance and proficiency. Sports Illustrated dubbed him our leading philosopher of sport. And while that sounds a bit like an oxymoron, he actually tapped into a philosophical tradition, beginning with the Greeks and their ideal of the education of the whole man, and through the American transcendentalists, Thoreau and Emerson and William James. What he found was that developing through his play and discovering himself, he resonated with the idea of individuality, the idea of taking responsibility for your life and living your life rather than being lived by it. On a personal note, I'd like to say, what did I learn from my dad? I learned that it's never too late to stop growing. I learned also that he's a tough act to follow, and you're going to hear from him in a few minutes. But I learned that's not the proper measure, that what we really want to do is be the best person that we can be. He tried to be the best George Sheehan that he could be. I'm trying to be the best.
Dr. George Sheehan, cardiologist, marathon runner, author, has become one of running's most eloquent spokesmen as he pursues his own outer limits.
I think the reason I got into running was that I was 45 years old. Now that's 15 years back. And I was in that change of life, middle-aged melancholy or whatever. Time that Peter Drucker says you should change your career. I was filled with those dissatisfactions, and I just didn't feel that I was living the life I was supposed to. I'd been trained just to go through life the way it had been, but I say I just pulled the emergency cord and got off that train and went back to my body. It just seemed the simplest thing to do. We live in a culture where the body is a second-class citizen. We've been split off from our bodies, and ever since the time we went to church, the body was either bad, we have to save our soul. Then we went to school, and all they cared about was our IQ or PSAT test. And then when we got into industry, you're either a blue-collar worker or a white-collar worker. So all the time, the body's being degraded. Yet, we are our bodies. Our bodies are us, you know, and this is the only life we're going to live. We live it physically. We have to live at the top of our powers. You can't believe how good I feel. This is a playful, joyful experience for me. I think Marianne Moore said something about satisfaction is such a minor thing. Joy is what we want. So the job, see, is to find out what is a joy to you as this running is to me. You know, all this stuff about stopping smoking, stopping drinking, that's going ass backwards. See, if you get into something that you really love to do and is joyful and is addictive and physical, you automatically stop these things. Before I started running, I was getting bombed out about every weekend, falling asleep in front of the TV. I didn't smoke because I was too cheap, but I would have. Anyway, when I started running, all these things automatically left. You know, Gandhi once said, don't give up anything until you don't need it anymore. You still need to smoke and drink unless you get into your play, believe it. I suppose what really happens when we get into this type of exercise thing is that we become athletes. The definition of an athlete is someone who makes the most out of his genetic endowment by training in the environment. See, and that's what we're talking about. Trying to get the most out of what we were born with, regardless of whether we're quite up to being Joe Namath or O.J. Simpson or whatever. And know that, like David, we're marvelously made also. And that man at any age is still a marvel of the universe. So when you become an athlete, what you do is you just put age aside. You're no longer age, you're growing. And I don't care what age it is. I'm 58 and growing. You start out with fitness and then find this meditation and contemplation on the run. And for many of us, that's enough. But finally, at least for me and many others, you have to take yourself somewhere on a Sunday or even up to Boston and see who you are. Each of us is an animal, a child, an artist, and a saint. And Emerson said, be first a good animal. See, we've got to be a good animal. We're sitting around not being animals. I've gotten down to where I'm a good animal now. You can do that too. You'll be your particular breed of animal. And then a child, so you can find your play. Find out what that thing is that puts you in that magic moment where the whole world falls away from you. And then an artist, because in play you become creative, and then you apply it later. But you never have an original thought unless you're in action. And then finally, we have to be saints. We have some way to be a hero. And sport provides a theater for heroism. You can go through your whole life in the United States and not know whether you're a coward or not. I can go in a race and go through tensions and trials and challenges that I haven't experienced in a year in my day-to-day living. I can live, die, and be born again. You know, we all become then an experiment of one. We begin to set our own rules and begin to think for ourselves. And that's what an athlete learns. And each one of us can be an athlete. I think what happens is running begins to inform your whole life. It gets inside of your entire existence. So your entire waking day has to do now with being a runner in some way. So I'm a runner doctor, runner father, runner husband, and I'm the better for it. Because I have the energy now, the physical energy, I have the creative energy, And God help me, I'll get the spiritual energy out of it too.
So get into your play, and you'll be able to say, I am 67 and growing. Thank you.